Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. Those present in the room, as well as the audience online, thank you very much for being with us this afternoon for a wonderful conversation coming up with Anna Gifty. Thank you to Knights PLC for hosting us and to the University of Bristol for facilitating a lot of these conversations as well. So the way the afternoon is going to play is I have a few questions that I've prepared for Anna that we're going to go over, but mainly this is so that we can also have a conversation and ask more and just have that kind of more relaxed chat, informal chat. A little bit more about Anna. So the reason she's here is because of this wonderful book that she wrote and published last month. Is it?
Yeah. Yes. I have no sense of time. Yes.
So Anna is an economist. She's currently doing her PhD at the Harvard Kennedy School. She is the co-founder of the Sadie Collective, and she's been working to support Black women economists throughout the past
I want to say maybe like 6 years or so. Yeah.
Probably since you were 6, without knowing it. So we're delighted to have Anna here with us, and overall her in Bristol. I think Bristol is a great place to have these kind of conversations, both because of its legacy, but also because of the impact that this city can make and the change that this city can make within its communities. So thank you very much for being here, Anna. And let's start with those few questions.
Yes.
Talk to us about your career journey and how you started in economics.
Wow. I think you're the first person in the UK to ask me about that, actually. Yeah. So first and foremost, thank you so much for having me. Oh, hello. Some people snuck in at the end. Hello, nice to see you. I'm trying to think of where to start. I think my exposure to economic inequality started at a very young age. So I did this program called Head Start. I don't know if y'all are familiar with it, but essentially it's sort of like a publicly funded pre-K preschool program for children of low-income working class families, basically. That's sort of what the program was. And when I was in that program, essentially I got an opportunity to get a full ride to a private school in the county. The private school was required by the county to admit one student from Head Start, and I was the student that they selected. So I went from, being around other kids who had very similar socioeconomic backgrounds to then being around kids who, had like the fancy playgrounds in their backyard. I heard the word cul-de-sac for the first time. I didn't know what that was, right? And being like, oh my God, I didn't realize that this like thing that I was watching on like Disney Channel was actually real, right? And I think that seeing that sort of economic inequality going from, where I was living to that school and going on play dates kind of exposed me to things aren't fair. I don't know why. And then I think when I was 16, I had an opportunity to go back to Ghana, where I'm originally from. I was born in Ghana for like 2 seconds, and then my parents got the visa lottery and we jetted to the States. And there I saw that, my family and I were better off than our relatives, right, economically. And so I could see, oh, it's not just that things are unfair from one end, but I also sometimes might be better off than, people who are around me. And so I think that really sparked kind of the career that I am in now, which is very much about how do we make things more fair, right, especially in the economy. I majored in math. For those who don't know, my friends might not even know that, but like majored in math, but had a short stint as a pre-medical student. If you're a child of immigrants, you already know, the drill. You know the drill. Parents really wanted me to become a medical doctor. I don't like blood, so I don't know how that was gonna work, right? And I would say from there, minored in economics and eventually decided to do sort of economics as my main career. I think the reason why I chose economics ultimately was because it's the language of power. A lot of powerful people pay attention to economists, for better or for worse, right? And so I was like, I kind of want to be able to be listened to. I feel like my questions are really important. But I also think that, as I later found out, there's an absence of Black voices, especially Black women's voices, in the economics profession. Just to give you a quick stat, out of 1,385 individuals who graduated with an economics PhD in the US, 4 of them were Black women in 2023. So that's less than half, actually, that's less than a third of 1%. So just thinking about concentrated power, who has sort of the say-so of what policies actually get greenlit, it became really apparent to me that I needed to be in the space. And so I've been in it since about 2018. Yeah.
And how are you finding it?
Well, listen, it's been a journey, you know what I'm saying? So I started off in the space really as an advocate. Most people knew me as the co-founder of the Sadie Collective, which is the first nonprofit organization in the world, I believe, to address the underrepresentation of Black women and girls in economics and related fields. It's now expanded to ethnic minorities and as well as first generation students, so folks who are going to college for the first time. I think that when I announced that I was getting my PhD or was going to do the PhD at Harvard, a lot of people were shocked because they didn't take me seriously as someone who should have been listened to in the space. And suddenly they were going to have to, right? Which is, you know, why I always advocate for people to go get that grad degree, honestly. But I would say that it's been largely good, though I will, because I'm a vocal person in the profession, there's a lot of eyes on me at any given time. I'll give you a quick story. So there's this, are you guys familiar with like Reddit? When I say 4chan, do people know what I'm talking about? Okay, so 4chan is like the unhinged version of Reddit, for those who don't know. More racist, is what I'll say. Says, yeah, it's pretty, yeah, that's what I'm saying. You know, the bar, anyway. So, you know, there's basically like a economics version of 4chan, which is called EJMR, right? Economic Job Market Rumors. And these economists did a paper where they were looking at sort of who's talked about on that website. It's basically a gossip website. And what's the sentiment around those individuals who were talked about. So there was an unnamed Black woman who was listed in the top 10 amongst the most negatively talked about individuals on the site. I am the unnamed Black woman. Just to give you a sense of like how some parts of the economics profession receive me versus others where I think I feel like I get like a lot of support from, you know, Larry Katz and, you know, folks might know Claudia Golden, who won the Nobel Prize recently in economics. That's her husband. And other folks who I think have been really supportive and really championing me. Folks like yourself, right? Folks like Dr. Iris Bonet, who's my dissertation chair. So there's been a mixed bag where it's like I get a lot of support, but then I'm also very aware of people who are not a big fan of the work that I do. Yeah.
And so somehow all of that work has brought you to this
Yes.
book. How come you had the idea for the book, and why did you have
Yeah.
it now and decide to go for it now?
Yeah.
And not after your PhD or
Oh my God, that's such a good question. No one has asked me that. Okay, I'll give you a quick story about how this book was inspired, and then I'll talk more about the latter part. So long story short, I had a conversation at a conference with this random white man who had some unsolicited feedback to give me after I gave a speech. Basically, you know, I was making an argument for how Black women are sort of the rising tide that lifts all boats. This is sort of the Black women best framework championed by Janelle Jones. And he didn't believe me. He didn't believe me. And so I felt like, what kind of facts are you drawing your experience from, right? Drawing sort of your conclusions from. And I think for me, I was like, well, I'm going to assume that you don't know what I know. And so, you know, that kind of was the impetus of making sure that this book came to life. I think with respect to your latter question, which no one has asked me, why did I put this book out now and why during my PhD? Well, I'll say this. I didn't intend for this book to fall into the middle of a very timely moment, right? Like I couldn't foresee. But I will say that I think back in 2024, it's 2025 now, right? Oh my God. So back in 2024, I think when Kamala Harris announced her presidency run, or no, she hadn't announced her presidency run, but I knew that like Donald Trump was going to run and there was going to be another person running, and then eventually it was Kamala. I realized this book is either going to be a prescription or a reaction, right? And I was like, depending on who ends up occupying the White House. And as we got closer and closer to the election time and, you know, Kamala Harris was thrust into the position that she was in, I was like, we'll see if she wins, but if she doesn't, this book is really going to be antithetical to everything that the administration is going to represent. And I mean, I can just point to the news and say, well, ended up being quite true. What I realized though is that I think it's both a prescription and a reaction, where what became clear to me when the book came out was there's a lot of communities that are trying to find ways to protect their own and to ensure that equity and equality are still tenets of their community. But it's also a reaction because there's very much a lack of equity and a lack of equality that is taking place on a very large scale. And so that's what this is responding to. With respect to the PhD being the timing, I just do what I want. Which, my dissertation chair is like, you're crazy. This is Iris. She was like, you're crazy. I think part of me is just like, when am I gonna have time to kind of be curious so openly and maybe also inspire curiosity in other people? And I don't know, people keep giving me opportunities to be openly curious like this. And so I was like, okay, if you're gonna give me money to write a book, then let me go ahead and write a book. And so that's essentially where that came from. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah, no, we had a lunch earlier today with a few other people
Yes.
in Bristol, at the University of Bristol, and some of the comments after that were that when you think about an economist and hearing a talk from an economist, you kind of imagine this more on the dull side type person talking about numbers and throwing numbers out and pretty much most of the times going over anyone's heads in the room. And everyone was talking about how you've lit up the numbers and just made it so
nice.
inspiring to talk about economics.
Yes.
Make economics a topic of conversation. And I think this book just does that for so many people. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. Economics is dope. I think people should do it. Yeah, for sure.
So in the process of writing the book,
Yes.
what did you find most challenging? But also, what did you find most inspiring?
Wow. I think writing a book is really challenging, right? The actual act of writing. I will also say that, as a quantitative researcher, I basically learned through this process because we had to interview 100 women, right? Qualitative research is really, really hard. Sitting down with people, transcribing what they say, trying to get the main themes, not trying to misinterpret or misrepresent their words. It's a challenge because you have your own paradigm of how you think things should play out, but then the interviews and the conversations that people have reveal something different. So let me give you an example. The chapter that this kind of really was prompted by was the first chapter, which is about beauty and the costs around beauty, right? In that chapter, we talked to high school girls and college age girls. And so when we asked them, like, how much, like what are you spending the most money on? What are the costs that come up at this stage of life for you when it comes to beauty standards? I thought they were going to say makeup, because when I was around their age, this was pre-Fenty beauty, right? So like you had to go around, become Picasso, you got to mix some things around, trying to find your right shade. And they said hair. And I said, hair? And then I started doing the research and I said, this makes sense, right? And so I think that was the challenging aspect of really not coming in and projecting what you think people should talk about and what you think people should identify as the costs that affect them. And being humble in that process, I feel like was kind of challenging, but we got there. There's a book now, right? I think what was most inspiring simultaneously was having these conversations with women and also having conversations with women in my life, right? So I shared in the last event that, this book really made me a better human above all else. I felt like I better understood my mom's decision making, my sister's decision making. And I would also say that my dad, who read parts of the book, was like, I didn't know you went through that. So I felt like it also made him a better human too, right? So I think what was most inspiring was just seeing how even being exposed to what people are experiencing just made me a more empathetic and kinder human, and allowed me to show up for people in a much better way post book. Yeah.
How many people responded to your call for evidence? That's my favorite part.
Yes. So when we first put out the call about this book, we asked folks on Twitter and women organizations across the nation, we're doing this book, we're thinking about it. if you want to weigh in, just sign up here. We had 4,000 responses, which already told me, I think we're onto something, right? We're onto something. Unfortunately, we couldn't include 4,000 people in our study. My dissertation advisor was like, oh my God, why didn't you turn this into a research project? And I was like, I wasn't thinking about it. So this is kind of like a side quest, in addition to my dissertation. But what we ended up doing was screening about 1,500 of those individuals and then randomly selecting 100 of those individuals to be included in the book. And so you really have folks who've lived in rural places to urban places, folks who are from different socioeconomic backgrounds, people who have lived lives as mothers. We have folks who are ranging from ages 18 through 72. It's a whole range of experiences and lives that are represented in this book. And I was really adamant about making sure that we honored their stories as best as we could. Yeah.
I remember when I was doing my PhD way too many years ago, and mine was on preventing trafficking in human beings. So
Very
I'm
important.
interviewing a lot of women who've experienced trafficking or have experienced smuggling and
Yeah.
forced labor. And I remember how intense it was reading about their experiences and the emotional toll that can have in an
That's right.
environment that isn't set up to support researchers to deal with that emotional toll in the
Wow.
same way that you have like social workers be supported through the process of talking through difficult, hard situations. How did you find that part of your work?
I think it was hard at times. I feel like some topics were a little bit easier to sort of navigate through. Like if you're reading about people spending money on hair, like I understand what that is. That doesn't feel as emotional, though I will say that I don't even know how many drafts of this book I've read, probably like 20 or something. But every time I get to the end of the book, I like cry, right? Which I haven't read the book since then, but like it's emotional to see like, man, all of this laid out is just kind of overwhelming at times, right? But I also think that there's a lot of hope, which is what kind of brings me to tears. Knowing that despite the reality, there is a better reality that we can fight for, that we can advocate for, that we can start pushing towards today, right? So yeah, I would say that's like how it's been. And I would also say too, kind of reflecting on some of the more personal moments that I share in the book has also been emotional. So one of my favorite openings in the book is the housing chapter. So it's called The Black Picket Fence. And I share a story at the very beginning about how my parents have never owned a home. And so when they were in a position where they could potentially own a home right around the time the 2008 financial crisis was about to hit, we would visit a lot of model homes like every single weekend. So these really nice fancy mansions, they have everything perfectly decorated, the fake food that you think is real, and then you go and it's like, no, you can't eat that, right? And I kind of laid out in the opening that, I would go into these model homes and I would imagine myself as living in them just for an hour or two. And then reality would hit and we would have to go back to our actual home. And I think like I remember having a conversation with my sister about that because she was the one who kind of informed that chapter and realizing like, man, my sister being the first person in our family to own her home is significant, right? But also I can't imagine how my parents felt having to go to these homes day in and day out and realizing that the kind of American dream that they were trying to achieve was maybe a couple streets away, but it was within reach. They weren't able to, actually get that dream. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's very powerful.
Yeah.
So I'm going to move us a little bit into a conversation about work and
Yes.
employment,
Yes.
because that's what I've been focusing my time at WorkVue on, and how do we ensure a more fair access to work
That's right.
and equal pay and fair pay as we navigate the world of work. You have a chapter on resume whitening, and I'd love to talk to you about that.
Yes.
Not least because a few months ago we had another guest with WorkVue. We had Daryl Fairweather.
Oh yes, dear
and
friend.
She is.
Yes.
She's and she was talking about how her mother named her Daryl because it could be perceived as a boy's name or a girl's name. And as a journalist, her mom wanted to make sure that she is positioned for like a foot up
That's right.
already from the get-go. So
Yes.
it's very common. Talk to us
Yes.
about your findings in the book.
That's right. So are folks familiar with what resume whitening is? Okay, I'm still gonna explain what it is, if that's okay. So resume whitening is basically what happens when people try to hide aspects of their ethnic or even gender identity so they have a better chance of getting a callback for a job, right? So let's say that, I'm applying for a job, and my name is Anna Johnson. I am Black, right? So I'm like part of the Black Gardening Club. I'll take the way Black from the Gardening Club descriptor so that I'm not indicating to you my race, right? So this is essentially what Sonia Kang and her co-authors have found. And what they showed is that resume whitening actually, unfortunately, works, right? So minorities who do engage in resume whitening, or in the case of ethnic minorities who might add their English name right under their ethnic name, will have a higher chance of being called back. Even when companies say, we care about diversity and we care about diverse perspectives, resume whitening still works to the benefit of minorities. This whole sort of chapter focuses on hiring discrimination. And here's where I tell you what my dissertation is about. So my dissertation explores sort of how do we intervene and disrupt hiring discrimination, especially against Black job applicants, by thinking about the role of Black leaders within organizations, right? So seeing whether or not a Black leader can affect whether or not people evaluate resumes from Black job candidates and minority job candidates differently because they know they're reporting to the Black leader, right? We're still working on it right now. Pray for us. I need to graduate, okay? And so with that in mind, this chapter really gets into why hiring discrimination takes place and why resume whitening might be necessary. Hiring discrimination oftentimes takes place because employers have interesting views on how productive certain groups of people are based off of very limited information. So for example, they might say a woman might be less productive than a man because the woman might decide that she gets pregnant. And over time, I'm going to observe that she's less productive. And so right now, today, that justifies me paying her less because over time, she's going to be less productive than the man, right? For Black folks, what it looks like is I believe that Black people are less productive than white folks, and I'm going to observe that over time. And so therefore, it justifies the pay gap that is going to be between the white applicant and the Black applicant. In economics, we call this statistical discrimination. I call it bigotry, right? Like I don't think it's, let's be honest, okay? And so, in this sort of chapter, I talk about what we can actually do to disrupt this, right? And the first thing is, I'm talking to folks who are interested in the workplace, in the room and online. I think that one, we need a lot more data and research focused on solutions to problems that we already have a good understanding of, which is hiring discrimination is a problem everywhere, right?
Yeah.
In Europe, I think the context that is important here is religious minorities are also discriminated against when they're applying for jobs. So I think there was a study that showed that hijabi women versus non-hijabi women, right? Hijabi women are more discriminated against in terms of the market as it pertains to hiring outcomes. And so with that in mind, okay, we now know the extent of the discrimination that's taking place, the inequality that's taking place. Let's talk about some solutions, right? And I think part of the reason why diversity, equity, and inclusion was so easily gutted in the US is because it wasn't evidence-based, right?
Yeah.
Like there was a lot of like vibes. Let's just be good people, you know what I'm saying? Let's be benevolent. And I think that, that's good for a warm, cozy feeling, but for actual action, we need evidence, right? And so that's like my one charge to people who are in this room and folks who are also online, that if you can be part of the evidence generating process, that's super important. Another thing that we know definitely works is, this is Dr. Iris Benet's work, joint evaluation. So if you have an applicant or applicants that are applying for a job, evaluate people together. That is more likely to reduce your reliance on bias, right? Because if you look at them one after the other, you're relying heavily on, okay, stereotypes and, quick shortcuts, heuristics is what we would call it, to make decisions about whether or not you think this person is qualified. But I also think fundamentally we need to think about what do we mean by productivity? Right? And this is sort of the economist's age-old question. What do we mean by productivity? In what sense and in what context is somebody productive? And is it that productivity looks the same for every single person and every single team? That's something that I think challenges the paradigm that underlies the actual workplace itself. Yeah.
And I'm seeing a lot of conversations these days that challenge what productivity means in the context of AI and automation, but they still happen in spaces of those economists that we usually imagine when we talk about economists. So unless we broaden that group and we have more eyes on what does productivity mean, we're just gonna transcend this view of productivity into the more tech, digital driven kind of world.
Yeah.
And I love the focus on data, and just kind of to highlight for anyone here, the book includes the receipts, right? You're
It
not
does,
just talking
literally.
their stories. The receipts are
Yes.
there with every chapter in terms of what is the cost of these different, the impact of this for women.
Yes.
One question before we open up for wider discussion, and that is, who's responsible to fix this?
Oh my God.
Who fixes this?
I think it's everybody's homework assignment, right? Like, though some people have more homework than others, right? I mean, I think on an individual level, we can advocate for things to be better in our workplaces, in our neighborhoods, in our local communities, right? So, let's use beauty, for example. You might be at Tesco's, right? That's what it is called. Tesco. Okay. Boots.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just throwing out words. And you might be like, I don't see any black hair products here. You can just be like, hey, is it possible to stock up on this? Right? Really, really simple action, right? I think on a collective level, like community-wide, I'm always going to be an advocate for unions every single time. Unions everywhere, all the time, right? Unions in the workplace, but I think also the idea of collectively bargaining and coming together can also be applied to something like childcare, right? When we say it takes a village to raise a kid, we mean that literally, right? I'm thinking about, just a quick story. My parents' experience with raising children has differed across borders, right? When they were raising my siblings, there were loads of aunties and uncles around in the neighborhood that could come in and say, hey, we'll take your kid off your hand while you go to work or whatever. In the States, they had to go looking for that community. But at first, it was very much an individual type of situation. And that can be stressful, right? So I think that thinking about sort of bringing resources together, pooling resources together to uplift all of us, that is what I mean by collectively bargaining and coming together and thinking about unions in every sense of the word. I would say on a policy level, you can use a book like The Double Tax as a litmus test for whether or not somebody actually has your best interest at heart. If they're not addressing the root problem of the problems that you are dealing with, they're not addressing the problem at all, right? Because you addressing, you said you have allergy. Allergy. Okay, sorry. But it's like you're addressing the sneeze, but you're not addressing the cold, right? So what this book does is says, well, this is what the cold looks like. So if you're not addressing the cold, I know that you haven't moved far enough, right? And so I think that this, along with other tools like WorkVue, right, as an organization, provide sort of frameworks and ways of thinking to really test whether or not politicians mean what they say and say what they mean, right? And I think it also allows us to organize around things that we have shared values about. So I think that's also important, and that goes back to what I said before, unions. Yes.
In the context when not everybody understands and agrees with this currently because of the political climate and the narratives coming from elsewhere and the headwinds in this agenda, how do we make sure that everybody means those communities as well?
Yes, this is the challenge. Well, I'll start by saying that I don't think we should be patronizing people into thinking the way that we want them to think, right? I think a lot of times we should be meeting people where they're at. So, right now in the States, and I imagine this is also true in the UK, it's like a cost of living crisis happening. Everybody seems to understand the cost of eggs are expensive right now, Gas is going up. And I think what we can say is, okay, this cost of living crisis is rooted in the fact that certain aspects of society have not been able to afford things for a while. And so what's happened is this fire that started here is finally making its way to your door. Let me maybe give another example of this in a pop culture sense. So Jimmy Kimmel, right, was recently attacked by the president, removed off air, then put back on air on conditions. And what I was explaining to people online was, I mean, you follow me on Blue Sky. Explaining to people online was, we wouldn't be talking about Jimmy Kimmel had we addressed Jamel Hill 5 years ago. So this Black woman also had policed around her language on television. She got suspended for it on ESPN. And we kind of said, oh, that's okay. But now it's made its way to Jimmy Kimmel, right? And Colbert is really the person who's actually suffering the actual consequence of his show actually being removed from air. But the point here is, I think we say, your fate and my fate are linked. What happens to me will happen to you if we don't address what happens to me. And I think we can do it in a way that doesn't feel alienating, where it's like, you're other and I'm over here. We can say, look, you're dealing with the cost of living crisis. I'm also dealing with the cost of living crisis. It looks differently for us both, but if we actually address my cost of living crisis, your cost of living crisis goes away. And I think making it really relatable, making sure that people understand the humanity behind it, and folks don't feel like you're prescribing them a solution that doesn't actually solve their problem. I think that that's the way we go about it. And a lot of that means that folks who have the knowledge need to be humble enough to provide the knowledge at a level that everyday people can understand. Yeah.
What is one thing that we could do following this conversation? One thing. Sorry, I'm throwing this at you.
No, I think this is great. This is great. So Equal Pay Day for UK is coming up on November 20th. You should be talking to each other about your salaries. One thing. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. It increases the floor for everybody.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Anna, for a wonderful conversation. Very
that was so fast.
It did.
Oh my gosh.
I'd love to open the floor, and if
Yes.
we can have more of a conversation and online, I'm gonna have to ask my colleague Sabina if there's any questions, if she could send them to me on WhatsApp. We can ask them out loud.
Great. You want to start?
Yeah, just on the getting the message across.
Yeah.
So a couple of years ago, I read a book called The Authority Gap. I don't know if you've read that. And I just wonder how you feel about that. How hard is it to get the message across for people to hear you and respect you, listen to your opinion, because you're obviously a woman, you're relatively young, and you're Black. So there's a
wow. Yes.
Yeah.
No, I think so there's two people behind you right now, my friend Amma and my friend Travis. They actually happen to be married as well. Their wedding was awesome. It was in Portugal, yes, last week. Anyway, so Amma told me a while back, she definitely remembers this conversation. I think it was like, I want to say it was like 2023 when you told me to make content.
Yeah.
And I remember, because on Instagram, I had just been posting my little cute photos. All my opinions were really stored on Twitter. And she's like, I really think you should like use your Instagram account to make content. I was like, who cares about politics on Instagram? Turns out a lot of people do, right? I didn't realize. But I think what I realized as I started breaking down concepts is that, one, it was making me a better expert because I had to figure out how to take this really complicated research paper and break it down to its bare bones, right? I also think that what I also realized it was like by breaking things down, I was taking a very humble stance of, I don't know everything about this. You might not know anything about this, but if I can be a little bit of a bridge, maybe we both learn from each other, right? What's been really nice to see is like, that just gave me chills. Like the videos I'll post on Instagram, for example, people then comment below and add more context. Or, hey, Anna, what about this opinion? I'll be like, oh, that's a good point too. So people like to say that, they'll come to my page and there's like always like a nice little healthy discussion in the comment section, which I think it's really great. Like, even if people are not engaging directly, they're seeing that conversation happening in real time. It's also true on Blue Sky as well. I think when it comes to being the person who's delivering the message, man, there's so many so many thoughts there. Yeah, so I'm young, I'm Black, and I'm a woman. There's people who have an issue with that. But I think what I have sort of decided is that I'm gonna make it really hard for you to ignore me. So everything I put out is gonna last a book. It outlasts me, right? I have a book before this book. It's gonna outlast me. A lot of the opinions that I'll put out there are in op-ed format. So I get paid for it, but also live on a media platform forever, right? I just my whole thing is accountability. So you might not like what's coming out of my mouth, but you're going to hear it, right? And that means that even if you decide to ignore it, it's still going to exist somewhere permanently for some time, right? So a book like this, like, unless people burn all the books ever, like it's going to be there for a while. So I think that that's kind of how I've navigated being a voice that is sharing this. As for the reception to what I've been saying, like, I kind of just take it on the chin.
Yeah.
A lot of this because my nieces need to live in a better world than I'm living in. And so if I have to take it on the chin so they don't have to take it on the chin, it's worth the fight.
I've just got the book as well.
Oh, sorry, you guys
I only just realized that you had another book because I saw the name in it.
Yeah, that book is more of like I'm like the DJ and we're spinning tracks and those people are just weighing in. But yeah. Yes, thanks.
Actually, speaking of that, the question
Oh,
from
this question,
online.
okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
What's next for you? Where do you go after you've set the standard so high?
Oh, set the standard is crazy. No, I'm in nights. Okay. I don't know. I feel like, well, I had the opportunity to teach last semester. I taught the economics and social policy with Professor Mark Shepard at the Kennedy School, and I loved it. I got some awards for it too. I was like, oh, I'm not too bad at this teaching thing. I feel really called and fulfilled to help prepare the next generation of leaders to use frameworks like these. I feel it in my bones, right? It's just really important for me that young people understand that a better world is possible. A lot of hopelessness and a lot of doomerism taking place, especially online. You know, folks are like, why are folks so obsessed with Love Island? I'm like, people are just looking for a reprieve. You know what I'm saying? People are looking to give their brains a break. But I do think that we need educators who have hope as a tenet for the way that they teach and the way that they lead in the classroom. And I want to be an educator in that sense. But I also recognize too that I've kind of lived 10 lives before the age of 30, which is kind of crazy, right? My parents who, you know, initially wanted me to be a medical doctor, when I got into Harvard, they're like, I mean, maybe this is working, right? like maybe this is working, right? And now with the book, they're like, wow, you know, I guess it is working. So I think that there's also a recognition of like, my arc is long, I hope. And so education will be part of that arc, but there's so many other things that I hope that I'll embark on, that, you know, maybe it looks like advising organizations or starting my own. And so I can't say for now definitively what's next, because I don't think we even know what kind of world we're going to live in the next 5 years, right? And so I think we'll adapt to the times as needed. But, you know, what I can say consistently is I'll always try to provide resources to help people better navigate their lives. Yeah.
And one more is, how has discussing the book with international audiences given you different perspective?
That's such a good question. I think, you know, one thing that I realized, sorry, I'm very animated, is in the beauty chapter, I really wish I had triple clicked on colorism, which I think would have had a lot more of a broader appeal. And it's also something I've personally dealt with. So I kind of touch on it a little bit, maybe give you guys some context. So clearly I'm Black, if you don't know, dark-skinned Black woman. But one thing that my parents didn't know until they read the book was I considered bleaching my skin back when I was about 15. So right around the time I met Amma, actually. And I think that that was rooted in very much the sort of costs that women are dealing with. You're having to meet an impossible standard that continues to move with every blink of an eye, right? And then you realize as a Black woman, as a woman of color, those standards aren't even based in your existence, right? You're not even in the standard, not considered in it. So I think colorism, there's a lot of really great evidence about it, would have been really awesome to add here. I think also talking to international audiences, what I realized is that America is probably having one of the more honest conversations about racism. It's painful for sure, but there's a lot of international audiences, especially in Europe, that are in like denial of racism actually being a thing. And what's been interesting is talking to scholars, offline, and them being like, the conversation around race, especially in the UK, is about 10 years behind the US, right? In terms of just like the language being used, sort of the advocacy. Not saying that people aren't doing work, but it's like the way in which it was sort of acknowledged in the US, it hasn't been matched yet in the EU and in the UK. I mean, I know the EU doesn't even collect information on race. So a lot of folks were wondering why we only focus on the US, because the Institutional Review Board, which sort of is the ethics review of research, was like, you can't ask the EU about race. Well, the book is about race and gender, so that limits my sample. And so I think that's been the thing that I've learned. And I've realized, well, this is also an opportunity. So, I've been floating the idea that, maybe I come back to London longer. We'll see, or like Bristol longer, right? We'll see. But I think there's an opportunity here to be part of the wave of individuals who are breaking open this conversation at a nationwide scale, and to hopefully bring some clarity so that we can have a better conversation about what actually moves us forward, and not just sort of doing this volley situation between topics around inequality. Yeah.
Why do you think that is, the slowness of conversation
Oh,
here?
girl, I don't know. I think part of it is because I like to say that I think British culture is very demure. You know what I'm saying? And I don't think anybody wants to be the first to make the noise around this particular topic, at least from my very, very limited experience here for the last like few weeks. But I also think there's no incentive to talk about it, right? I think when we talked about gender equality in the European context, you had Invisible Women came out, and something like that opened up a conversation, and people are like, okay, well, a lot of people want to hear about it, so we should talk about it. But I think that outside of Black History Month, even this Black History Month we were just talking about, it was kind of quiet, right? What's the incentive to talk about this? With
the UK, it has class issues.
Correct.
Whereas in America, class and race is so interconnected. Whereas here, you try to talk about race, they want to back and say, "Oh no, but we've got a white working class."
That's right. That's
so
right.
That is really, it makes the conversation difficult, and it makes it boring for us. So you just wonder, black people end up having this conversation with ourselves all the time.
Right. That's right.
Because you can't. It becomes boring talking to
1000%.
because of they just will always bring up they'll throw the class thing back at you.
And what's interesting is that in the States, that actually still is the case, where you talk about why the occupant of the White House got elected. He's not my president. And people will say, well, the white working class had economic concerns. And I said, if we're talking about evidence, what about his economic plan was going to address their concerns? Everything's more expensive now. He's just throwing tariffs on air. I mean, we don't even know what's going on, right? I think this question around, we talked about this earlier, white grievances, especially along class lines. It's a distraction from even the root causes of their problems, right? And I think that until we start having a really honest conversation about that, this is going to be sort of the reality that we keep circling. But to your point, absolutely. It seems like in the UK, there's this emphasis on class. And I think part of it is because of just how the class structure is set up. I think I was asking somebody recently about, like, what is middle class in the UK? And they were describing it, and I was like, that's middle class? But then I was like, well, your upper class is upper. You know what I'm saying? We talking about castles. You know what I'm saying? And that's crazy. Where in the States, like, upper class is like, you live in a nice little neighborhood. It's got a little cul-de-sac. You got a nice little BMW. It's not drastic. But I think it's because, well, this class structure, and it kind of includes most people. and then there's parts of that exclude everybody, that's where you start saying, well, I don't think race and gender kind of intertwine with class, when in actuality, if you look at the numbers, it does,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
But people are so fixated on those drastic differences that they're not talking about even what's happening within the working class. Yeah. Anyway, that's just a +1 to what you were saying.
Yeah.
I appreciate you adding that. Yeah.
So, sorry, they're international. So what about the continental Africa? Have you?
I have a lot of thoughts about Africa really quickly. I'm from Ghana, by the way, if you guys didn't know. Ghana. Yeah. Anyway. So
I've just been.
listen. Oh, really? Okay, love, where were you guys?
I went to Accra and Tema and
Okay.
Newcastle.
Okay. Went to places. Okay. More places than me. I usually get sick. Every time I go, I get sick. And I'm locked in Kumasi for like 2 weeks. Anyway, that being said, so I have a theory. I actually put this theory out last night online, and I was like, so what we know is factual. And this is actually happening sooner than I think. Africa's about to have the largest workforce in 10 years. I think everybody in power knows this.
Mhm.
And I also think that part of what's happening with like a resurgence of eugenics and a resurgence of white grievances and folks talking about, going back to certain times is so that we can normalize the exploitation and extraction of the continent. I think that at the end of the day, that's the end goal.
Yeah.
Right? Let's go ahead and dehumanize. And if we can take it all the way back, ideal. Right? I mean, I was telling people, not on my watch.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And so I do think that Africa is an economic opportunity and potentially an economic crisis in waiting. Right? And really it's about to be a function of whether or not African leaders can take seriously the tremendous opportunity and talent that they're about to have on the continent. I've also been thinking, someone asked me recently, like, what role do they think I'm going to play in thinking about that? And I'm like, I don't know yet, but like, it's clear that that's an opportunity that no one's really having a very serious conversation about, but they're about to.
Yeah,
because
I think people are, and
yeah,
particularly across the diaspora.
That's right.
I'm
But
involved in
beyond that,
conversations like that.
that's right. But it's
what you said is exactly what
exactly it. That's right. Yeah.
I'll shut up now.
No, it's good. It's great. It's great. Yes.
Oh, this was another question.
I love it. Yeah. We'll talk offline. That's great.
I feel like I'm taking it down a notch in terms of.
Girl, why are you prefacing with that?
Oh, yeah. I feel like we've started like what next?
No. Go ahead. Yes.
But I was just really interested in. So we work in the arts.
Yes.
And one of the things that people don't talk about is like the role of partners in the ability to be a creative, and your partner often adding a layer of stability, and the kind of invisible role that partners do. So, so you can chase your goals or whatever. But I was just wondering if there was anything about intimate relationships or partners in the book.
That's the one thing that I didn't address, namely because I think the data really focuses on the heterosexual relationships. What I will say is a complementary book to this is Having It All by Dr. Corbin Lowe. So she talks about sort of this breakdown in relationships and how like a woman's role is affected by that. And she like spells out the economics of that. That book is also really accessible as well. But yeah, I would say that's kind of the sister book to this. What I would say to your point though is what you're getting at is also something that shows up in the caregiving chapter. So the one that's focused on the balancing act and mothering, and how sort of women especially are expected to just take care of everything without a conversation being had. I remember once I was on some sort of like church, like Zoom call. This was during 2020. So, everything was on Zoom. And there was like a couples event. And there was one couple that I knew. I knew the woman very well because she was a computer scientist at a really well-known bank. And she's just brilliant. And she says something that I will never forget. She says, I'm working this job and then I come home and I take care of everything. I clean, I cook for my husband, I take care of the kids. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, girl, did you not just clock out? Like, that's crazy. But I think about my sister and that's her day to day, right? She works a long shift as a pharmacist. She comes home. She's got 2 wonderful but screaming children, right? At her doorstep asking, very very demanding, right? And I'm thinking about like, what role is your partner playing in that invisible role that you're talking about, which I think is quite visible in the household, right? When people actually show up, but when they don't, clearly that cost then falls entirely on women, almost always. Yeah. Of course.
What I'm going to quickly do now, despite the fact that we have another 25 minutes to have conversation and engage, is wrap it up so that we can let our online audience go, and then we can have a more informal chat. So thank you everyone for being here today. Thank you so much, Anna, for being here with us.
Thank you.
We will make a link to the book available both to the online audience and anyone who's been here today. And thank you very much. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.